Chapter 1. Land in the North. Crack! Rig marked the snowy pine tree with his hatchet. The noise echoed through the forest. He yanked it from the bark and struck it 3 more times. Crack! 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 He left the hatchet stuck on the last blow. He'd be able to find his way back through the forest should his tracks fill with snow. He straightened his wolf pelt cloak and sat on it cross-legged, pulling the hood down with his bow in hand. Rig waited until the dim gray skies of dawn cast shadows across the forest floor. The creeping shade faded in and out with the swaying of the branches, teasing his heart with hopes of rabbit. The ends of his long brown hair hung solidified outside his hood, and his facial hair collected snow, forming a white beard. He tightened his grip and gritted his teeth, gazing between the trees. There was nothing. No movement besides snowfall, the swaying of branches, and the occasional dumping of snow. This was the 7th day in a row Rig had trekked by the early morning moonlight to these parts in search of game, only to find lands devoid of wildlife. The first 3 days made him question his skill, and he wondered if he was doing something wrong. But as of the last few days, he believed the game was gone altogether. Nothing? His voice was a cracked utterance in the cold. I don't believe this. Not once have I hunted this many days in a row in the late spring without any sign of game. Rig took a deep breath through chilled nostrils. The cold stung, but the stark realization of failure hurt worse. This day was already like the others, he reckoned. He should have seen several elk or deer by now. It baffled him. Not so much as a bird had flown from a branch, nor had a single animal track been seen. Rig tried not to let his frustrations consume him and refocused on the ever-brightening forest floor. The food store back at the longhouse was low, and he needed to find something to kill soon, or he'd have to barter. Rig shifted his thoughts to alternative ideas. Searching for bear caves crossed his mind, but that was never an idea worth acting on without a party. He thought back to his days growing up in the village. He remembered a particular time hunting bear as an adolescent with some of the townsfolk. They'd found a cave with a mother and her cubs. It didn't end well. One of the village's better men lost a leg and bled to death before the mother was put down. Ever since then, Rig wouldn't have anything to do with bears if it could be helped. Perhaps he could go to the coast and find seals or fish. He hadn't tried that yet. When the sun was off the seas, Rig rose to his feet, leaving heaps of snow where he'd nestled in. He dusted his cloak off and wiped his face, shoving a thick piece of roasted potato in his mouth from the pouch at his side. He ripped the hatchet from the tree with a frustrated exhale and walked north. Snow showers blew in. The scattered flurries drifted through the forest, mesmerizing and distracting him from the mundane. Before he knew it, midday had come, and the ocean glittered between the trees. Rig stepped onto the sands with renewed hope, but to his dismay, those too were devoid of life. The snow had let up, and Rig was able to pull his hood back with only minimal flakes blowing into his eyes. He looked out at the ice floats cluttered about the coast and saw seals. They were unreachable and few. It felt like the gods were taunting him. Within the ceiling of gray clouds, with their varying shapes and differing brightnesses, there were breaks allowing for brilliant rays to escape. At the edges of the horizon, the overcast gave way to clear blue skies. All this disappointment hasn't been in vain, he thought, looking out to sea. Rig was the type to stop and take in the view. The formation of nature and weather was a subject of fascination to him. It always had been. His observations throughout life had given him an understanding of the lay of the lands and weather patterns. He would use this knowledge to seek out and exploit resources for survival, whether it was where caves may open, where animals might go, where forage may be found and where to build a shelter. Rig's knowledge of the natural world served him well. Certainly a departure from the rest of the days. I could barely make out the sea from my yard 3 days ago. But now, things are calm. I may have clear skies by nightfall. Rig smiled for the first time in nearly a week, and with his spirits lifted, he thought of the nearby river outlet. He could search for fish. It wasn't hopeless to try. If he had no luck in the river, however, he'd have to go back home empty-handed. He'd have to go to the village to barter. That was the deal he'd made with his father. The blue skies in the distance were approaching fast, and the clouds above were beginning to clear. A wall of sunshine moved closer. A hole opened above Rig, shining warm light on him. He turned back to the ocean once more with a pleasant smile. Several floats drifted under the sunlight, and the seals lazing atop barked in a continuous cacophony of excitement. The ice reflected a turquoise hue onto the water, and the rest of the seas gleamed an azure blue. Rig wished for a moment he could join them. He didn't care how cold it may be. As he daydreamed, movement caught his eye from the tree line. Rig dropped swiftly to a knee, becoming enshrouded by the cloak, and carefully retrieved an arrow from the quiver hanging at his lower back. He rolled the shaft between his fingers as he watched for movement. He knew it wasn't a trick of the eye. He'd been hunting and gathering in the wild long enough to know the minute details of any sound signifying something alive, and he was correct. It was an animal, but not that which he hoped. A lone wolf stood in the shadows of the tree line, not 30 yards away, looking at him with the taste for flesh in its eyes. His heart raced. He was not the only hunter in these woods. Dealing with a starving predator was never good, but starving wolves were something else. Gruesome tales came to mind as he stared at the ragged beast. When Rig lived in the village growing up, he heard stories from the other hunters of villagers being slaughtered by wolves. One story he'd heard shared over a mug of mead at the campfire always came to mind.
Eric had to relieve himself. It was a cold, moonless night. He walked out of sight of the fire, and we did not see him until morning. Behind the brush, only steps from his seat, naught but mangled legs and arms scattered to and fro, the shell of his body with entrails strewn all about. Blood, piss and shit splashed the white snow like spring mud and spilt wine. They got him like how we fall cider in their own camps in the dead of night. We never heard them cry once. There were many, and they struck fast, taking the breath from him before tearing him apart. Eric must have been enough for them, for we could have just as easily been had. We were lucky.
The wolves loved to sneak in ambush. That was how they were deadly. And the wolves of Northfold were not like that of other countries. Wolves from the neighboring southern realm, Suderfold, were merely larger than domesticated dogs. Here, they rivaled ponies in size. Rig locked gazes with the creature, waiting for it to make a move. Its lips curled, revealing clenched fangs. It took a step forward and raised a paw, revealing its emaciation. Rig didn't kill wolves unless he had to. Even then, he didn't eat them. But these were dire times. He rose carefully, fitting the arrow, but the fatigue of hiking, the cold, and his own hunger stifled his steady aim. The wolf continued to gaze at him with killing eyes, but Rig remained calm. When he thought his aim was as good as it was going to be, he let the arrow fly. It missed, slightly left, finding a tree somewhere beyond with a loud knock. The wolf retreated into the forest, and Rig felt a tinge of bittersweet relief. A potential fight was avoided, as was a possible meal. Rig let out a frosty breath, trudging back into the woods. He came to the rushing river and followed it a ways. He kept his wits about him as he traversed the uneven terrain, avoiding roots and crumbling banks. He searched for flecks of silver in the wash and among the still pockets. Salmon would be a wonderful treat after such a long and fruitless day. Smoked salmon, cheese, and bread from town would be magical. This made his stomach growl, and now his thoughts were flooded with all the different kinds of food he could barter for. Part of him wanted to give up and go home. Not yet, he told himself. There has to be fish here. I know it. He came to a calm bend in the river and scanned the black water for a time. Nothing. He let out a sigh, clutching a rock he'd picked up from one of the banks. At this point, he was resigned to believe he'd find nothing, as he had for the last 6 days. He cast the rock into the river angrily, letting the frustration course through him. It was long past midday, and it was getting late. It's time to go back. The journey was quiet and cold. Rig kept his senses about him, walking carefully with his thoughts. Nothing stirred, and still, no signs of prey. Midway through the forest, the clouds came back, shrouding the western half of the sky, and it snowed again. At dusk, he stopped in his tracks to listen to his surroundings. A slight noise drowned out by the wind, and the brushing of branches made its way to his ears. He stilled his breath and heard a brief, almost inaudible tuft of snow underfoot. He took several more steps and stopped abruptly, hearing it again. When he would walk, it would resume. It was too soft to be a bear, and it certainly wasn't a hoofed beast. The sound indicated something smaller, and because he could hear it, he knew it was close, following him. The wolf. Rig continued on, lessening the swing of his arms and shortening his gait. He'd move and listen, then stop. The tufts grew louder and louder, and when they were only yards away, he turned. It was indeed the hungry wolf from before. It was close enough for Rig to see the pupils of its eyes. It growled at him, baring its fangs. He stepped backwards, careful to make no sudden moves. Putting distance between them, he stepped between two trees and without warning broke into a sprint. The wolf gave chase, breaking off from his tracks. Rig dashed in a straight line for a familiar clearing. Ahead of him lay two bent-over shrubs beneath the cover of some drooping spruces. He heard the paw beats closing in from behind and dove over the foliage, rolling to his feet with hatchets drawn. The sound of brush rustled behind him as he whipped around ready to fight. To his glee, the shrubs stood upright, jerking up and down as the wolf was caught in a snare. It was a trap set by Rig 4 days ago. The thrashing was stilled, and in little time the wolf was gutted and slung over his shoulder. Rig was overjoyed as he walked back to his path through the woods, and his satisfaction was enough to make the rest of the trek fly by. Unfortunately, none of the other snares set up along the way home had been sprung, but he didn't mind. It was twilight when Rig finally reached the longhouse he and his father had built. He stopped at the tree line, gazing upon the wooden structure. From the north coast, the elevation rose, terminating in sheer cliffs at the end of a crescent-shaped bay. Rig's longhouse was built on the northwest edge, cradled upon the bluffs between the forest and the ocean. From the high perch of his home, the bay cut eastward for miles, bending south and eventually west. Upon the opposite shore, beyond the horizon, lay the capital city Fjarðaborg. Rig walked across the yard, stepping into an open shed where he skinned the wolf as fast and as cleanly as he could. The hunger pains came strong. He finished, throwing it into the bin and latched it shut, stepping outside. Rig proceeded to the north-facing entrance of the house. He pushed open one of the double doors and stepped in. The scent of burning pine filled his nostrils. His eyes adjusted to the warm orange glow of the dying fire. Rig shut the door and braced it with the plank before throwing his cloak onto a peg in the wall. He kicked his boots off by the fire pit and proceeded to strip down, laying his clothes upon the flat, wide stones of the hearth. Exhaustion set in. Rig grabbed a chopped log in each hand from the far wall and threw them into the embers before going straight to his room beyond a deerskin curtain. He threw himself into his bed without a care, letting the pouch of potatoes fall to the floor. His stomach disagreed with this, growling in protest. Rig reached down, fumbling with the leather strap, and grabbed a potato. He ate it ravenously before covering himself with his enormous bearskin blanket. The hunger pains relented, and then came an overpowering drowsiness. Rig welcomed it and shut his eyes.